My name is Clara, and I've been married to David for 12 years. Our daughter, Emma, is 8 years old. She's a sensitive soul, but she has a core of resilience that never ceases to astonish me. Every single year, we make the trip to the grand Christmas gathering at my in-laws' estate, an event that I've always secretly dreaded. This year was different, though. This was the year everything came to a head because of what happened with the presents. The long, simmering tension with Eleanor and Robert, my in-laws, finally boiled over and erupted. If you're watching this, I'd be so grateful if you'd like and subscribe. And please, let me know where you're tuning in from. You are not going to believe what was inside that envelope my husband finally revealed. I came from a simple life in a small town in Pennsylvania. My dad was a plumber and my mom worked part-time at the local library. We never had a lot of money, but our home was always filled with more than enough love. I chose to become a kindergarten teacher because I have a deep love for children and a firm belief in the importance of nurturing their earliest potential. My classroom became my haven, a joyful space where every child was celebrated for who they were. I first met David when I was a sophomore in college. I was juggling my studies with a part-time job at the campus coffee shop to make ends meet. And one rainy afternoon, he walked in. He was different from the other wealthy students who often treated the staff like we were invisible. David always took a moment to chat, and he always left a generous tip. He was studying business on a clear path to one day join his family's enterprise, a massive manufacturing empire that had been in their family for 3 generations. Our love story felt like a whirlwind. David's world was one of country clubs, sprawling summer homes in the Hamptons, and untouchable trust funds, while I was working 2 jobs just to get by. When he asked me to marry him after only a year together, I was ecstatic, but also deeply terrified of stepping into his life. The first time I met his parents was at their magnificent estate in upstate New York. Eleanor, his mother, greeted me with a polished smile that was all form and no warmth. It never touched her eyes. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a St. John knit suit, with a rigid posture that screamed finishing schools and high society charity balls. Robert, his father, was a bit warmer, but his skepticism about my background was palpable. The entire dinner that night felt less like a conversation and more like a gentle but persistent interrogation about my family, my education, and my life goals. From that very first day, Eleanor made it abundantly clear that I was not the daughter-in-law she had pictured for her son. She would make constant references to other suitable young women from their elite social circle. She'd call my teaching career sweet, but ultimately unnecessary. She'd frequently ask when I planned to elevate my wardrobe to something more fitting for their world. David always stood up for me, but he did it in that soft, non-confrontational manner I would come to understand was a defense mechanism, one he'd perfected over a lifetime of managing his parents' towering expectations. He truly believed that, in time, they would come to see in me what he saw. The annual Christmas gatherings at the family estate were a special kind of torment. Every year, the entire extended family would descend upon the manor for 3 days of festivities that felt more like a stage performance than a genuine celebration. There were exacting dress codes for every meal and event, seating charts based on some invisible and mysterious family hierarchy, and gift exchanges that seemed meticulously designed to flaunt wealth and highlight differences in status. After our wedding, David and I faced a heartbreaking 3-year struggle with infertility. Those were dark and difficult times, made infinitely worse by Eleanor's constant probing questions about when we would finally produce an heir, preferably a boy, she'd add, to carry on the family name. When we finally shared the news of my pregnancy, her very first question was whether we had done genetic testing to find out the gender. The disappointment that flashed across her face when we told her we were expecting a girl was impossible to miss. Emma was born on a snowy December morning, and she was perfect in every way. David wept when he first held her, whispering promises to always shield her from anything that might ever try to dim her bright light. Robert seemed genuinely smitten with his new granddaughter, often sneaking away from his business calls to rock her in his arms or read her a story. Eleanor, however, kept a polite and noticeable distance, treating Emma more like a fragile, decorative object than a cherished grandchild. As Emma grew up, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Eleanor showered her other grandchildren, Michael and Brittany's children, with affection and extravagant gifts, particularly their sons. At family functions, Emma would often be placed at the very end of the children's table, while her cousins were given places of honor near the adults. During summer visits to the family's lake house, the boys would be taken out on the boat for fishing trips with Robert, while Emma was left behind with the suggestion that she might prefer helping in the kitchen. David saw these little slights, but he would often brush them off, saying his mother was just from a different era or didn't quite know how to connect with little girls. I held my tongue time and time again for the sake of peace, but every single incident carved a fresh wound in my heart. This year, the weeks leading up to Christmas felt different. David had been working longer hours than I'd ever seen him work, often getting home long after Emma was already asleep. He seemed perpetually distracted, always on his phone, engaged in hushed, serious conversations. When I tried to voice my concern, he would just reassure me that he was working on something big, something important that was going to make everything better. Then, about 2 weeks before Christmas, his entire demeanor shifted. He became relaxed, confident, almost giddy. He started dropping cryptic hints about this year's Christmas being one for the books and kept asking me to just trust him. Despite my deep-seated dread about another holiday spent navigating the treacherous waters of family politics, his newfound enthusiasm was infectious. Maybe, just maybe, things would finally be different this time, I thought. The night before we were scheduled to drive to the estate, David sat me down after we'd put Emma to bed. He took both of my hands in his and looked me straight in the eye. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "Tomorrow is going to be difficult, but I promise you, by the end of it, everything is going to change. Can you trust me one more time?" There was something in his gaze, a powerful mix of determination and a strange sense of freedom that made me believe him. I nodded even as a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Whatever he had up his sleeve, I knew it was going to be monumental. As we were loading up the SUV the next morning, with Emma chattering excitedly in the back about seeing her cousins, I saw David discreetly slip a thick cream-colored envelope into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He caught me watching him and he just gave me a quick wink. "Insurance policy," he said. I had no idea just how prophetic those 2 words would turn out to be. The drive to the estate was just under 3 hours. Emma sang Christmas carols the whole way, while David was uncharacteristically quiet, his hands firm on the steering wheel. As we made the turn onto the long, private road that led to his parents' property, the mansion loomed into view. It looked like something out of a storybook, but one that held a dark, menacing secret. The 3-story colonial home was draped in what must have been thousands of pristine white lights, with enormous, perfectly crafted wreaths adorning every single window. Professional decorators had transformed the entire property into a winter wonderland, complete with life-size Nutcracker soldiers flanking the grand entrance and a colossal Norwegian spruce that was visible through the 2-story foyer windows. Before we got out of the car, David squeezed my hand. "Remember what I said," he whispered. "Trust me." The heavy front door swung open before we even had a chance to ring the bell. Eleanor stood there, poised in a crimson cashmere sweater and a string of pearls, her silver hair styled into a flawless coif. Her smile was as cool and clinical as ever as she air-kissed David's cheeks. "Darling, you've lost weight. Are you eating properly?" Her gaze then slid over to me, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan of my simple green dress with a barely perceptible flicker of disapproval. "Clara, How nice to see you. I trust the drive was uneventful." She then bent slightly, not quite getting down to Emma's level. "And Emma, my goodness, you've shot up." Robert appeared behind his wife, his ruddy face breaking into a wide, genuine smile. Unlike Eleanor, he gave each of us a warm hug, lifting Emma high into the air for a proper grandfatherly embrace. "There she is, my Christmas angel. I've been waiting all year to see you." He set her down and then leaned in to whisper conspiratorially, "I might have something special for you in my study for young ladies who enjoy adventure books." Eleanor pursed her lips. "Robert, don't spoil the gift exchange. You know the rules." We opened presents together after dinner. We followed them into the grand foyer, where a wave of voices and laughter spilled out from the adjoining rooms. The house was already teeming with relatives, some I recognized from years past, and others who seemed to emerge from the woodwork only for these major family events. Michael, David's younger brother, approached us with a tumbler of whiskey already in hand. He was 5 years younger than David, but carried himself with the smug entitlement of the family's golden boy. His wife, Brittany, trailed behind him, a vision in designer labels and subtle cosmetic enhancements. "Big brother!" Fashionably late as usual, Michael boomed, clapping David on the shoulder with a little too much force. "Dad was just mentioning the Sullivan acquisition. Sounds like you really dropped the ball on that one." David's smile didn't waver. "Nice to see you too, Michael. How's the new boat?" As Michael launched into an exhaustive monologue about his latest yacht, Brittany pulled me aside with a sickeningly sweet smile. "Clara, that dress is so charming, so understated. You always manage to look so appropriate on such a budget." Before I could even think of a reply, their children came thundering down the main staircase. 12-year-old Tyler and 10-year-old Jacob barely gave us a glance before loudly demanding to know when lunch would be served. Their 7-year-old sister, Olivia, who was wearing a velvet dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, gave Emma a dismissive once-over. "Your headband is so last season," she announced, a perfect miniature of her grandmother, from her patrician airs to her passive-aggressive put-downs. "Clara, Emma, how wonderful that you could make it again this year," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Emma, the children are watching a Christmas movie in the theater room. Perhaps you'd like to join them, though I believe they've already started the film." The translation was crystal clear. "You're late, and my grandchildren shouldn't have to restart their entertainment for your daughter." Throughout the afternoon, I kept noticing strange, furtive glances being exchanged between various family members. Conversations would die down the moment David or I walked into a room. Even Robert, who usually acted as a buffer against Eleanor's icy demeanor, seemed to be actively avoiding us. At one point, I was alone in the kitchen, helping the catering staff, something Eleanor had suggested would be more comfortable for me than socializing in the drawing room, when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "Eleanor is beside herself," said a voice I recognized as Aunt Patricia, Robert's sister. To think that David would jeopardize everything over some misguided sense of principle. "Well, the board meeting certainly didn't go as she'd planned," replied Uncle George, Eleanor's brother. "Robert is trying to smooth things over, but you know how it is. Once trust is broken..." They moved out of my hearing range, leaving me standing there, clutching a tray of hors d'oeuvres with trembling hands. What had David done? What board meeting? He had never mentioned anything about it. When I finally found him in a group of male relatives discussing finance, his demeanor only confused me more. He didn't seem worried at all. In fact, he looked almost cheerful, nodding along to the conversation but with a distant look in his eyes, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. When our eyes met from across the room, he shot me a quick, reassuring wink. Just before dinner, I managed to corner him in a quiet alcove off the main hall. "What is going on?" I whispered urgently. Everyone is acting so weird, and I overheard Aunt Patricia talking about a board meeting and broken trust. David took my hands. I promised you that after today, everything would change. And it will. Just wait. Just wait until the gift exchange. Can you hold on until then? Something in his eyes, that strange mix of excitement and resolve, managed to calm my racing heart. I nodded slowly. Just tell me one thing. Are we going to be okay? Is Emma going to be okay? His smile was radiant. Better than okay. For the first time since I can remember, we are going to be exactly who we were meant to be. The dining room at Eleanor and Robert's estate could have easily seated 30 people under a massive crystal chandelier that was rumored to have once hung in a European palace. The table, a single magnificent piece of mahogany polished to a mirror shine, stretched down the length of the room, flanked by tall windows that looked out onto the snow-dusted gardens, now artfully illuminated by landscape lighting. As I had expected, our little family was seated at the far end of the table, the designated Siberia of the dining arrangement. Emma was placed at the children's table a few feet away, while her cousins, Tyler, Jacob, and Olivia, were mysteriously given seats next to their parents at the main table. I saw Emma's flicker of confusion as she realized she was the only grandchild who had been relegated to the kids' section. The 7-course meal was a parade of culinary ostentation. Each dish was presented like a work of art, described in lavish detail by the private chef Eleanor had flown in from a Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan. The wine flowed like water, with each bottle's esteemed provenance and high price point thinly disguised as tasting notes. For the first several courses, the conversation was dominated by family business matters, and David was pointedly and conspicuously excluded. Michael held court, frequently referencing meetings David had supposedly missed and decisions that had been made in his absence. The expansion into the Asian markets is moving ahead of schedule, Michael announced, directing his words to Robert while deliberately ignoring David. The board was a little hesitant about the timeline, but I assured them we could accelerate things without sacrificing quality. Robert nodded distractedly, his gaze occasionally drifting toward David with an expression I couldn't decipher. Eleanor, presiding over the table from the opposite end like a queen on her throne, orchestrated the conversation with subtle nods and perfectly timed interruptions. During the fish course, she aimed her attention at me with a precision that ensured the largest possible audience. "Clara, I was just telling Judith about your charming little background," she said, gesturing to a distant cousin whose husband apparently owned a significant portion of Newport. "It must be so rewarding working with small children, though I imagine the salary leaves a great deal to be desired." Before I could even form a response, she continued, "It's admirable, really. Choosing personal fulfillment over financial security. Not everyone has that luxury, of course." The jab was clear. I only had that luxury because I had married her son. "Actually," David interjected smoothly from beside me, "Clara was recently offered a position developing curriculum for a very prestigious education publisher. They sought her out specifically because of her innovative teaching methods." This was true, although I hadn't yet decided if I was going to accept the offer. A flash of surprise crossed Eleanor's face before she quickly masked it. "How lovely," she said dismissively, before pivoting to a topic she deemed more important. "Robert, do tell everyone about the new wing we're funding for the hospital." Throughout the meal, I kept a close eye on Emma at her lonely table. My heart ached as I watched her try to make conversation with her second cousins, most of whom she only saw at these annual gatherings. The older kids ignored her, and the younger ones followed their lead. Eventually, she gave up and just focused on her plate, her small shoulders hunched in defeat. Midway through the main course, Robert made an unexpected effort to bring David into the business talk. "Son, what are your thoughts on the new production facility proposal?" You always had a good eye for operational efficiency. Before David could even open his mouth, Michael cut in. "Dad, remember? David has been focused on his special projects lately. He's probably not up to speed on the proposal. A thick, uncomfortable silence hung over our end of the table. I felt David stiffen beside me, but when I looked at him, his expression was strangely neutral, almost amused. "Actually," David said calmly, "I think the Madison site is a far better choice than the Greenfield location, even with the higher initial investment. The state tax incentives and its proximity to the interstate would offset the costs within 3 years." Robert's eyes lit up with a flicker of pride, while Michael scowled into his wine. Eleanor cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps we can set aside the business talk for after dinner." Brittany was just about to tell us about Tyler's latest achievements at his fencing championship. As dessert was being served, I excused myself to use the restroom, using the opportunity to check on Emma and whisper a few words of encouragement. On my way back, I took a wrong turn down an unfamiliar hall and accidentally came upon Eleanor and her sister-in-law, Aunt Caroline, in a heated, hushed conversation in a small study. "It's absolutely unconscionable," Eleanor was saying, her voice tight with rage. "After everything his father has done for him, the sacrifices we have all made." Caroline nodded sympathetically. "The family legacy means nothing to him anymore. It's that wife of his. She's filled his head with these foolish ideas about independence and making his own way. Well, he'll regret it when the trust implications become clear." Eleanor snapped back. "Robert may be having second thoughts, but I certainly am not. The inheritance structure is ironclad. There's no room for sentimentality." I backed away silently, my heart hammering in my chest. Was David being disinherited? Was that what this was all about? I hurried back to the dining room, arriving just as Eleanor was announcing that it was time to adjourn to the living room for the gift exchange. David must have seen the distress on my face, because he reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it. When I tried to whisper what I'd overheard, he just gave a slight shake of his head. "It doesn't matter anymore," he murmured. "None of it does." I had no idea what he meant, but there was no time to ask, as everyone was already getting up from the table. Emma came running to my side, her earlier dejection temporarily forgotten in the excitement of presents. As we all filed out of the dining room, I saw David pat the inside of his jacket, a quick, subtle check to make sure that mysterious envelope was still there. Whatever was about to happen, we were about to find out. The living room had been transformed into a grand display of wealth masquerading as holiday spirit. A 14-foot fir tree towered in one corner, its branches laden not with sentimental handmade ornaments, but with color-coordinated glass baubles and antique trinkets. Beneath it sat a mountain of professionally wrapped gifts, each adorned with a perfectly calligraphed name tag. Eleanor directed the gift exchange with the precision of a drill sergeant. First, the adults would exchange their gifts, and then the children in order of age, from oldest to youngest. This tradition conveniently ensured that Michael's children always got their presents, long before Emma, building her anticipation to an almost cruel level. The adult gift exchange was a predictable procession of polite oohs and ahs over luxury items. Cashmere throws, limited edition watches, rare vintages of wine, and exclusive spa packages. David and I had spent weeks carefully selecting thoughtful, personal gifts that were within our means, but they looked pitifully modest next to the sheer extravagance of the others. Eleanor barely glanced at the artisan pottery bowl we gave her, though Robert seemed genuinely touched by the first edition novel by his favorite author that David had spent months tracking down. When it was our turn to receive gifts, Eleanor presented me with a voucher for a series of cooking classes. "Since you mentioned wanting to improve your skills in the kitchen," she announced. I had never said any such thing. David received an expensive silk tie that Eleanor noted would be perfect for important business meetings, should such opportunities arise again. Finally, it was the children's turn. Eleanor made a grand show of selecting ornately wrapped packages from under the tree, calling each child forward to receive their gift, along with a personal comment about how special they were. Tyler went first, ripping into a massive box to reveal the newest gaming console, plus a half dozen of the latest games. For our brilliant competitor, Eleanor declared, to reward your focus and determination. Jacob was next, receiving an impressive drone complete with a high-definition camera. For our little engineer to encourage that technical mind of yours. Olivia squealed with delight as she unwrapped a brand new tablet, already loaded with apps and encased in a sparkly pink cover. For our beautiful princess, who brings such grace to our family. One by one, every cousin was called. Even the children of distant relatives received meticulously chosen gifts. Science kits for the studious ones, sports equipment for the athletic ones, musical instruments for the artistic ones. All throughout this long process, Emma sat quietly on the edge of her seat, her eyes growing wider with each name that was called. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and she kept smoothing down the skirt of her Christmas dress, the one she had picked out herself because the colors matched the ornaments on the tree. Finally, the last present was given to Cousin Judy's infant son, who immediately tried to chew on the wrapping paper. The gift distribution was over. Emma sat frozen, her eyes fixed on her own empty hands. A heavy, awkward silence descended upon the room as several of the adults slowly realized what had just happened. I saw Robert frown and lean over to whisper something to Eleanor, who just waved him away with a dismissive flick of her wrist. I was already halfway out of my seat, a hot wave of rage building in my chest, when Emma's small, quiet voice cut through the silence and stopped me. "It's okay, Mommy," she said, her chin trembling, but her voice impossibly steady. "Maybe Santa will bring something tomorrow." The sheer quiet dignity in her voice shattered something inside me. My 8-year-old daughter was displaying more grace and maturity than every single adult in that room combined. David's hand tightened on my arm, holding me in place. Eleanor, probably sensing the growing unease in the room, let out a practiced, airy laugh. Oh goodness, did we miss one? Emma's gifts must have been misplaced. So many presents this year, it's just so easy to lose track. The excuse was flimsy, hollow, and utterly insincere. Several family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but not a single one of them spoke up. Aunt Caroline leaned over to her sister. Perhaps it was left upstairs in the guest room. Should I go and check? Eleanor shook her head. "I'm sure we can sort it all out in the morning." "Emma understands, don't you, dear? These things happen." Emma just nodded politely, but I could see the profound hurt in her eyes. She understood perfectly. This was no accident. My heart was breaking for her, and I was seconds away from grabbing our coats and storming out of that house when David stood up. David rose to his feet with a slow, deliberate movement that immediately captured everyone's attention. His posture was relaxed, but carried a new authority, a stance I had rarely, if ever, seen him take in his parents' home. The room fell quiet as he cleared his throat. "Before we officially conclude the gift exchange," he said, his voice calm but carrying easily across the large room, "there's one more present that needs to be opened." Eleanor fluttered a hand dismissively. "David, darling, we've finished with the gifts. Perhaps whatever you have can be added to the stocking tradition tomorrow morning." David's smile didn't falter. "No, Mother. This particular gift was meant to be opened last tonight. It's rather important." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the thick cream-colored envelope I had seen him with all evening. It was sealed with a wax stamp bearing a logo I didn't recognize. Eleanor's face tightened. "We have a schedule to keep, David. The servers are waiting to clear the wrapping paper before we serve coffee and dessert." "The servers can wait 5 more minutes," David replied, a new edge of firmness in his tone that seemed to take everyone, especially his mother, by surprise. "I would appreciate it if everyone remained seated for just a moment longer." Robert shifted in his chair, suddenly looking alert and intensely curious. Michael and Brittany exchanged baffled looks. David walked across the room to where Emma was sitting, still composed despite her crushing disappointment. He knelt down so he was at her eye level, something I'd noticed Eleanor never, ever did. "Emma," he said, his voice gentle but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sometimes the most important gifts don't come in big, fancy boxes with shiny bows. Sometimes they represent something much bigger, something that will last a lot longer than any toy or game." He held the envelope out to her. "This is from both your mom and me, although I was the one who did the paperwork. It represents our love for you and all of our hopes for your future." Emma took the envelope carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Should I open it now, Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart." Everyone is waiting to see what it is. With careful, deliberate movements, Emma broke the seal and pulled out several pages of official-looking documents. As an 8-year-old, she couldn't possibly understand their meaning, but she studied them with a serious expression. "Can you tell me what it says, Daddy?" There are a lot of big words. David gently took the papers from her and stood up, keeping one arm wrapped protectively around Emma's shoulders. He looked directly at his parents as he began to speak. "6 months ago," he announced to the stunned room, "I resigned from Lawrence Manufacturing." A ripple of murmurs spread through the family. Eleanor's face went pale. "As some of you are aware, I started my own company, Phoenix Innovation Group. What you may not know is that 3 months ago, we secured our Series A funding at a valuation of $60 million, roughly double the current worth of Lawrence Manufacturing." Michael literally choked on his drink. Brittany's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. David continued, his voice unwavering. "These documents establish the Emma Lawrence Trust, which now owns 20% of Phoenix Innovation Group. Another 30% is held by Clara, and I retain the remaining 50% as the founder and CEO." He looked down at our daughter with a wide smile. "Which means, Emma, that you are now part owner of a company that makes advanced medical devices to help people with heart problems. This trust will provide for your education and your entire future, and one day, if you want to, you can help run the company." Emma's eyes grew wide. "I own part of a company that helps people's hearts?" "You do." "Because you have the biggest heart of anyone I know, and I want you to always remember how valuable that is." Eleanor had recovered enough to speak, her voice brittle with anger. "David, this is hardly an appropriate conversation for Christmas Eve. The children do not need to be burdened with business matters." David let out a genuine laugh, a sound that seemed to surprise even himself. "On the contrary, Mother. I was under the impression that Lawrence family tradition places the highest value on legacy and inheritance. Isn't that what tonight's gift exchange is really about? Establishing who matters and who doesn't?" Robert stood up now, his expression unreadable. "Son, perhaps we should discuss this in private." "No, Dad. I've spent my entire life discussing things in private. Avoiding confrontation, accepting the family hierarchy. That ends tonight." David tightened his arm around Emma. "When I saw the look on my daughter's face tonight, when she finally realized she had been deliberately and cruelly excluded from the gifts, something inside me finally broke. The very last thread that was tying me to this toxic family dynamic just snapped." He addressed the entire room. "I didn't leave the family business on a whim, or because I couldn't handle the pressure, as some of you have been led to believe. I left because I watched how my daughter was treated at every single family gathering, the subtle and not so subtle ways she was made to feel less than her cousins. I left because no company in the world is worth sacrificing my child's sense of self-worth." Eleanor's face had hardened from shock into a mask of cold fury. "You have always been overly dramatic, David." No one has mistreated the child. Children are simply sensitive and imagine slights where none exist. David's expression became granite. "Are you suggesting Emma imagined not receiving a single gift tonight, while every other child, down to a 6-month-old who can't even hold a toy, received something?" For once, Eleanor had no response. Robert spoke up, his voice heavy with the authority he had wielded as CEO for decades. David, what you've done, starting a competing business without discussing it with the family, it's unprecedented. The board will have questions. Questions about proprietary knowledge, non-compete clauses, all handled legally and ethically, David interrupted. I developed entirely new technology in a completely different sector. Phoenix doesn't compete with Lawrence Manufacturing in any market. I made sure of that, out of respect for what you built, Dad. He turned to face his father directly. But I will not sacrifice my daughter's future or her happiness for a company that was never going to fully accept her or her mother. The room had fallen completely silent. Even the younger children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Michael finally broke the tension with a forced, hollow laugh. Well, congratulations, brother. Though $60 million is a rather optimistic valuation for a startup, isn't it? David's smile was serene. Our first product received full FDA approval last month. We currently have orders from 17 major hospital systems and are in late-stage negotiations with 4 international distributors. Our projections for next year put us at nearly $80 million in revenue. Feel free to ask your financial advisor if that valuation is optimistic. Michael's smug smile froze on his face. Brittany suddenly became intensely interested in adjusting her bracelet. Throughout this entire exchange, Emma had been watching the adults with wide, curious eyes. Now she tugged on David's sleeve. "Does this mean I got a present after all?" she asked, her voice clear in the silent room. David knelt down again. "You got so much more than a present, Emma. You got a future where you will never, ever have to feel less than anyone else. And that's the best gift I could ever think of." The silence that followed Emma's innocent question was deafening. For a few long seconds, no one moved or spoke. Then, like a dam bursting, the room erupted into chaos. Eleanor shot up from her chair, her legendary composure finally cracking. "This is outrageous! To use Christmas Eve for such a theatrical, manipulative announcement. To embarrass your family this way in front of everyone." Robert stepped toward his son, his expression a storm of conflict. "David, we need to discuss this privately. There are aspects of this situation you may not fully understand." Michael was already on his phone, furiously texting, no doubt trying to verify David's claims about Phoenix Innovation Group. Aunt Caroline was whispering urgently to her husband, while various other relatives either stared at their dessert plates as if they were the most fascinating things in the world or openly gawked at the drama. I moved to stand by Emma, placing a protective arm around her. Despite the adult turmoil swirling around us, she seemed remarkably calm, looking up at her father with absolute trust. "Is Grandma angry because I own part of a company?" she asked, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "No, sweetheart," I answered, smoothing her hair. "Adults just have complicated feelings about change sometimes. That's all." David turned to me. "I think it might be best if you take Emma upstairs for a little while. This conversation is long overdue, but she doesn't need to hear the rest of it." I nodded, understanding that he was giving me a gift, too, the chance to shield our daughter from the ugliness that was sure to follow. I took Emma's hand and led her toward the doorway. "But what about dessert?" she whispered as we left. "I think we'll have our own special dessert a little later," I promised, an idea already taking shape in my mind. Once Emma and I were safely upstairs in our assigned guest room, the confrontation in the living room escalated. David later recounted every detail of what happened in our absence. Eleanor had immediately launched into a tirade, her voice tight with fury. "How dare you ambush us like this? After everything we have done for you, the opportunities we have provided, the connections we have made." David remained standing, calm in the face of her rage. "What exactly have you done for me, Mother? You pressured me into a career I never wanted. You've criticized every significant choice I've ever made. You've treated my wife with barely concealed contempt, and you've ignored my daughter, except when it was socially convenient to acknowledge her." Robert tried to intervene. "Son, your mother has always wanted what's best for you, for the family." "No, Dad. David countered. "She has wanted what's best for her vision of this family, a vision that has never included Clara or Emma as full, respected members." Eleanor scoffed. "This is absurd." "You've always been overly sensitive, David. If your wife feels unwelcome, perhaps it's because she has made so little effort to adapt to our way of life." David's voice stayed level, but his words were like surgical steel. Emma didn't imagine being the only child without a gift tonight. She didn't imagine being seated away from the family at Thanksgiving last year, while her cousins sat with the adults. She didn't imagine being excluded from the sailing lessons you arranged for all the other grandchildren last summer. He took a step closer to his mother. "For years, I told myself these were just oversights, not deliberate acts of cruelty. I made excuses for you, to Clara, to Emma, and worst of all, to myself. Not anymore." Eleanor glanced around at the other family members, many of whom were now pointedly avoiding her gaze, deeply uncomfortable with the truth being laid so bare. "You have clearly been planning this dramatic exit for some time," she said, trying to wrestle back control of the narrative. "I suppose you expect us to be impressed with your little startup, to come begging for a reconciliation now that you've had your tantrum." David laughed, a sound that was genuinely amused, not bitter. "That's the difference between us, Mother. I don't need or want anything from you anymore. I didn't build Phoenix to impress you or to compete with the family business. I built it to create something meaningful, something I could be proud to pass on to my daughter one day if she wants it." Robert had been watching the exchange with a look of dawning horror. Now he stepped forward. "David, I had no idea you felt this way. About the company, about your place in this family. I tried to tell you, Dad, many times, but you always deferred to Mother on family matters, and she never wanted to hear it." Robert turned to his wife, and I saw something shift in his entire demeanor. "Eleanor, did you deliberately exclude Emma from the gifts tonight?" Eleanor drew herself up to her full height. "I simply forgot to purchase something for her. With so many grandchildren, it's difficult to keep track." "That is a lie," Aunt Caroline suddenly interjected, stunning everyone into silence. All eyes swiveled to her. "Eleanor, I heard you tell Brittany last week that you had decided not to get Emma anything this year because, and I quote, 'David needs to understand that there are consequences for disloyalty.'" A collective gasp echoed through the room. Brittany's face turned bright red as she intensely studied her own manicure. Robert's face darkened. "Eleanor, tell me this isn't true." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed, but for perhaps the first time in her life, she was speechless. David's voice was quiet when he spoke again. "We'll be leaving tonight." Emma deserves to wake up on Christmas morning in a place where she is truly wanted and valued. At that moment, I had returned to the doorway of the living room, having settled Emma with a book. I heard David's final declaration and walked to his side, taking his hand in a silent show of support. Eleanor made one last desperate attempt to regain her authority. "You are overreacting, as usual. No one is asking you to leave. This can all be sorted out reasonably in the morning." David just shook his head. "No, Mother. Some things can't be sorted out or smoothed over with polite fictions. Using my 8-year-old daughter as a pawn in your power games crosses a line that can never be uncrossed." He turned to his father. "Dad, I'm sorry it came to this. Despite everything, I have always respected what you built and the values you tried to instill in me. I hope that someday we can find a way forward." Robert nodded solemnly. "I would like that, son." As David and I turned to leave, Michael called out, his voice dripping with scorn. "So that's it? You're just walking away from everything? From your birthright?" David paused and looked back at his brother. "I'm not walking away from anything that truly matters, Michael. I'm walking toward the future I want for my family. There's a difference." Upstairs, we packed our bags quickly, explaining to Emma that we were going on a surprise Christmas Eve adventure. Instead of disappointment, I saw only relief in her eyes. She had always been far more perceptive than we gave her credit for. "Are we going home?" she asked, helping to gather her things. David knelt down to her level. "Actually, I have another surprise. I booked us a suite at the Grand Plaza Hotel in the city. They have a special Christmas package with a room service dessert buffet and a perfect view of the holiday lights in the park." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Just the three of us?" "Just the three of us," I confirmed, my heart swelling with love at her excitement over something so simple as just being with her parents. As we carried our luggage down the grand staircase, Robert was waiting alone in the foyer. Eleanor and the others had apparently retreated, unable or unwilling to witness our departure. "David," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know I had no idea about the gift, about any of it, really. I've been so focused on the business, I let myself miss what was happening right here in my own family." David's expression softened. "I believe you, Dad. But there's a difference between not knowing and not seeing." Robert nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. He then turned to Emma. "I have something for you, Emma. I was saving it for tomorrow, but I think you should have it now." He handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was a beautiful antique brass compass in a polished wooden case. "This belonged to my father," Robert explained. "He gave it to me when I was about your age. He told me it would always help me find my way home no matter how far I traveled." Emma studied the compass with reverence. "Thank you, Grandpa." "You are very welcome," Robert said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Your father is a good man, Emma. I hope you know that." "I do," she replied simply. "He's the best dad ever." As we loaded our bags into the car, David was quiet. Once Emma was buckled in, I touched his arm. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He took a deep breath. "For the first time in longer than I can remember," he said. "I think I actually am." Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. The hotel had provided a small tabletop tree, and beneath it lay a colorful pile of gifts. As Emma tore into her presents with all the enthusiasm an 8-year-old can muster, I found myself reflecting on the night before. The anger and the hurt were still there, but they were eclipsed by an overwhelming sense of freedom. For 12 years, I had twisted myself into knots trying to fit into the Lawrence family's mold, constantly making excuses for their behavior and blaming myself for not being good enough. Now, that entire charade was over. David's phone rang while Emma was engrossed in a new art set. It was his father. "Merry Christmas, Dad," David said, his voice cautious but not cold. I couldn't hear Robert's reply, but I watched as David's expression shifted from wary to surprised, and finally to something that looked a lot like hope. "I appreciate that, Dad. It means a lot. Yes, she's right here, having the time of her life." "Of course. We can talk more after the holidays." When he hung up, his eyes were suspiciously bright. Dad apologized, a real apology, not just a superficial sorry your feelings were hurt kind of thing. He said he spent most of the night thinking about what happened, about the last several years. "What about Eleanor?" I asked quietly. David's smile was sad but resigned. "Mom is Mom." Dad said she's still insisting this was all a misunderstanding that I blew out of proportion. But he also said, and this is a direct quote, "For the first time in 45 years of marriage, I am not backing down just to keep the peace." Later that morning, we had room service breakfast in our pajamas, another small act of rebellion against Eleanor's rigid traditions. Emma declared it the best Christmas ever as she dipped strawberries in a mountain of whipped cream, a treat that would have been unthinkable at the Lawrence family table. "Can we do this every year?" she asked, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. David and I exchanged a look. "We can definitely make our own traditions from now on," I told her. "Christmas should be about joy and love, not stress and formality." "And presents," Emma added seriously, making us both laugh. David reached for my hand across the table. I should have done this years ago. I kept hoping things would change, that my parents would eventually see how special you both are. I squeezed his fingers. You did it when it mattered most. When Emma was old enough to understand what was happening, but young enough that she won't have to carry the scars. As the day went on, we ventured out to explore the city's festive displays. Emma skipped between us, chattering excitedly about her new part ownership in a company that fixes hearts. Can I visit the company sometime? She asked David. I want to see how the heart helpers work. Absolutely, he promised. After the holidays, I'll give you a full tour. You can meet the engineers and scientists who design them. Maybe I'll be an engineer when I grow up, she declared, or a scientist. Or maybe the boss, like you, Daddy. You can be anything you want to be, I told her, marveling at how different this message was from the ones she received at family gatherings, where girls were subtly guided toward decorative pursuits rather than substantial ones. 6 months later, on a warm June afternoon, I stood in the bright, airy reception area of Phoenix Innovation Group. Through the glass walls of the main conference room, I watched as David presented the company's quarterly results to his team. The growth had surpassed even his most optimistic projections. Emma sat beside him, having been allowed to leave school early for what David jokingly called her future CEO training. She was supposed to be drawing, but I could see she was paying rapt attention, occasionally asking a question that made the adults around the table smile. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Since Christmas, he had made a consistent, genuine effort to rebuild his relationship with David and to forge a real connection with Emma. Eleanor remained a distant, frosty figure, but Robert had surprised us all with his capacity for change. Dinner still on for Saturday? Found a children's science museum Emma might enjoy beforehand. I smiled as I texted back a confirmation. The boundaries we'd established were firm. Respect for our family unit was non-negotiable. So far, Robert had honored these terms. My own career had taken an exciting turn as well. After accepting the curriculum development job, I discovered a passion for creating educational materials. With David's encouragement, I had recently founded a small educational consulting firm. As the meeting ended, Emma spotted me and came racing over. Mom! Dad says I can help design the new logo for the kids' version of the heart monitor. I already have ideas. David followed her, winking at me over her head. Our marketing team might have some input, but Emma's artistic vision is pretty compelling. I bet it is, I agreed, ruffling her hair. Ready to head home? We can stop for ice cream on the way. As we walked to the car, Emma swinging between our hands, I was struck by how different she was from the quiet, hurt child from last Christmas. She was confident, bubbly, and secure in the knowledge that she was loved and valued. Later that evening, after Emma was in bed, David and I sat on our back porch, enjoying the summer twilight. It wasn't a mansion, but it was warm, welcoming, and truly ours. Do you ever regret it? I asked, voicing a question that still lingered sometimes. Walking away from your family's legacy? The security? He considered the question for a moment. No, he said finally. What I regret is not doing it sooner. I regret the years Emma spent thinking she wasn't good enough for my family's approval. I regret the stress you endured. But mostly, I'm just grateful. That envelope held more than just company papers. It was our Declaration of Independence. It gave us permission to create our own legacy based on love and respect, not obligation and appearances. I leaned my head against his shoulder. When you pulled out that envelope, I had no idea how completely it would change everything. Neither did I, he admitted. I just knew I couldn't bear to see the look on Emma's face one more time. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. Family isn't always what you're born into, I said finally. Sometimes it's what you choose to build. David nodded. And that's the gift I want Emma to carry forward. The knowledge that she is worthy of love and respect exactly as she is, that she never needs to shrink herself to fit someone else's expectations. As the stars began to appear, I thought about the journey we'd been on. The The pain hadn't vanished, but it had transformed into a foundation for something stronger and more authentic. Family can be our greatest source of pain or our greatest source of strength. And sometimes it takes one moment of standing firm in your truth to discover which one yours will be. Have you ever had to make a difficult stand for someone you love? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the courage to break unhealthy patterns. Thank you for listening, and remember that the family you choose to create can be your most powerful legacy. End of story.